Alzheimer's?
What are you doing here?
Your grandma tells me her grandson's some fancy environment lawyer down in Cincinnati.
I am a corporate defense attorney.
So?
I defend chemical companies.
Well, now you can defend me.
How many did you lose?
190.
190 cows.
You tell me nothing's wrong here.
It's a small matter for a family friend. Help a guy who needs it.
The farmer or you?
That's chemicals, I'm telling you.
I'm seeing documents I don't understand. They're hiding something. That chemical. What if you drank it?
Drank it? It's like saying, what if I swallowed a tire?
What if whatever's killing those cows is in the drinking water?
At DuPont, better living through chemistry. It's our DNA.
You need to tell me what in the hell's going on.
DuPont is knowingly poisoning 70,000 local residents for the last 40 years. You knew, still you did nothing.
You want to flush your career down the toilet for some cowhand?
You want to take everything that you know and turn it against an iconic American company, like an informant. Isn't that right? Isn't that right? Isn't that right?
Yes.
They have all the money, all the firepower, and they'll use it. I know. I was one of them. Our government is captive to DuPont. They're trying to force you to make me stop.
He was willing to risk his job, his family, for a stranger who needed his help.
The system is rigged. They want us to think it'll protect us. We protect us. We do.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a very special episode of Midnight Double Feature, where today I'm joined by someone who not only served as the inspiration for one of the best films you'll see this year, but someone whose determination, courage, and bravery inspires myself as a young lawyer. He's a seasoned and internationally recognized litigator, advocate, and author who currently represents a range of clients across a wide variety of matters that involve federal, state, and local environmental laws. He uncovered the worldwide impact of environmental contamination by the forever chemicals known as PFOA and PFOS, leading to the securing of benefits of over $1 billion for his firm's clients who were impacted by such chemicals. For these achievements that spanned decades of work, he was awarded the International Right Livelihood Award and more recently was awarded the Legacy Award by his firm, Taft, Stettinius and Hollister. Through his book, titled Exposure, Poisoned Water, Corporate Greed, and One Lawyer's 20-Year Battle Against DuPont, and the 2019 drama feature film Dark Waters, directed by Oscar nominee Todd Haynes, he was able to tell his story and spread the word about these forever chemicals. In an article published by the New York Times in January 2016, journalist Nathaniel Rich referred to him as the lawyer who became DuPont's worst nightmare. Joining us today here on Midnight Double Feature, I am honored to be speaking to none other than Mr. Robert Bilott. How are you, Rob?
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. This is such a fantastic opportunity, not just for the podcast, but for myself as well. Yeah, I just entered my second year of law, of practicing law, so I can't tell you just how honored I am to be speaking to you.
Well, thank you so much. It's really my pleasure to be here.
So, unfortunately, Dark Waters was released right around the time COVID-19 was breaking out, and as a result, it sadly went underseen. For those who haven't really seen the film or who haven't had the opportunity to read your book, give me a very brief rundown of PFOA and its misuse by DuPont in the laws.
Sure. You know, the film and the book really give you the history of how we ended up with chemicals, not just PFOA, but related chemical like PFOS. And now we know this whole family of chemicals we call PFOS, per and polyfluoroalkylated substances, which is a real mouthful. You know, now people refer to these as forever chemicals. It's this whole family of man-made toxic chemicals that have now managed to contaminate drinking water, soil, all over the planet, and are in the blood of virtually every living creature in the planet, including humans. And really, it just helps provide the story of how did this happen, you know, and How did these chemicals get out there? And how did it happen that this occurred, frankly, during our lifetimes, out of the United States, involving one of the biggest companies on the planet that had a stellar reputation for leading the science? And, how did something like this occur? And really showing the story of how one individual in particular, a farmer in West Virginia named Wilbur Tennant, was able to stand up, speak out, and say something really wrong was going on here, and how he was able to really lead all of us to understand that these chemicals even exist, how they got out and got into our environment, and what it took for not only Mr. Tennant, but his family and then the folks in his entire community to take this issue on, and what they went up against, not only in their own community, but frankly, for years, the resistance they faced to get this story out so that all of us now know about this chemical threat. These chemicals that are now in our blood and in our drinking water have been linked to decreased immune response and potential effect on vaccine response. Here during a time when we're all battling, a pandemic across the planet, here's something that most people don't even realize and don't even understand, that we've got these chemicals in our blood and in our drinking water that may be making that even worse. So it was really an honor to have the folks that participate, folks like Mark Ruffalo, be able to put this story together in a way that gets it out to the rest of the world. And I wanted to do the book Exposure as well, just to give more background about how all of this happened. And so hopefully it won't ever happen again.
Absolutely. I'm halfway through Exposure myself, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's such a great, I was introduced to this story via the movie Dark Waters, and then, I'm using your book as kind of like a supplement to add to that. And it's just such a well-written book. So it's fantastic. So you'd been working at your law firm, Taft, Stettinius and Hollister, for some time before the late Mr. Earl Tennant first approached you. As I understand it, Taft is a law firm that primarily defends corporations like DuPont. So when Mr. Earl Tennant approached you about this and asked you to take this company on head on in a plaintiff lawyer's capacity, what was going through your mind? I know a lot of lawyers these days would pretty much immediately dismiss it, given that they work technically for the opposition.
What really led to us taking this case on was first that phone call, that Mr. Tennant made to me back in 1998. And when he was telling me all about cows dying on his property, I was about to hang up the phone. I had no idea why he was calling me. And certainly, that was not the kind of thing I dealt with. As you indicated, I had been up to that point in my career working primarily with the big chemical companies and helping them try to comply with all the laws. So I had no idea why he was even calling me. But then he mentioned, the name of my grandmother, and that these cows that he was talking about were outside Parkersburg, right where my mom's family had grown up. We had spent a lot of time, as kids there. So, that family connection led me to at least say, come on up, at least bring what you've got. I'll take a look at it. And I was skeptical, and you see that in the film, and I talk about that in the book as well. I had a hard time believing, that something like this could be going on, particularly with a company with a reputation of DuPont. But when he brought these videotapes and photographs, and we took the time to look at it, to watch the videos, to see what was going on, it was pretty clear to us. Clearly, there was something wrong here. You could see this white foaming water. You could see the animals standing in it with tumors and blackened teeth and dead wildlife in the area.
The bleached rocks as well, right?
Correct. So, when you could see that, it seemed like, this should be something we should be able to help him on. I was helping companies get permits to run landfills. And I understood the way that system worked. These permits should identify any of the hazardous, toxic chemicals in the landfill, and would give you limits on how much could be discharged. So we assumed, hey, this would be a rather straightforward thing. I'd be able to pull the permits. We'd figure out what chemicals were there that were maybe being emitted too high. We get to the bottom of it quickly. Had no idea at the time that when we got into this, we would be dealing with something that wasn't regulated. It wasn't listed. In fact, nobody really knew anything about this chemical that we found out was in the landfill. So, when we first took it on, we thought, it'd be fairly straightforward. We'd get to the bottom of it quickly. And it soon became clear we were dealing with something very, very different.
Absolutely. And were there any issues around conflict that arose as you were navigating your way through this? I mean, given that Taft is a firm that defends companies like this, was there any issues about conflict? I mean, I was really captivated by a point you raised in your book where you mentioned that there was some evidence of defense lawyers who had taken the case against DuPont in the past being potentially paid by the company to act as a consultant, quote, consultant, unquote, and therefore conflicting themselves out of the case that they were working on. So I'm not saying that something like that came up while you were working on this, but did any conflicts of interest arise?
Well, this became very complicated over time. We did not ever represent DuPont, so we had no conflict, bringing a case against them. But, as we found out and started digging through the documents and realized it wasn't just this property out in West Virginia that was contaminated. It wasn't just Mr. Tennant and his family's property, but this was a chemical getting into the drinking water of tens of thousands of people, and potentially all over the country. Then we had to really make a hard decision at that point about whether to kind of take this to the next level and actually bring a class action lawsuit against the company and pursue some claims under some legal theories that were not popular among a number of folks, particularly in the chemical industry. Claims like medical monitoring. That would allow you to sue, for the increased risk of getting injured in the future. So it was a difficult decision. But, when we sat down, and you see this in the film, when we and I talk about it more in the book as well, but when we sat down and looked at what was in those documents, what was known by the company about the toxicity and the risk to the people, and the fact that really, we might have been the only ones who had that information and knew this. This is a public health threat, that we felt it was important to do this, to take this to that next level, and to try to get relief for these folks, and in the same time also get this information out to the regulators and to the public. And that eventually happened. Eventually led to the US EPA finally, understanding that this was even happening and beginning to take steps to regulate. They even eventually sued DuPont over all of this. So it was a long process, but one that was incredibly important because we had a massive public health threat.
Absolutely. Something that really surprised me as I'm watching this is the EPA's stance towards self-regulation. Before I think it was the mid-70s, companies would self-regulate chemicals, and they would have the obligation to notify the EPA. What do you think about? What's your stance about that? Because I found that very, very surprising, the self-regulation of chemicals.
Well, that's one of the things I try to explore a little more in the book, too, is just this history of how our regulatory systems developed over time. I think a lot of folks would be surprised that don't work in the environmental arena or aren't lawyers, would really be surprised to realize that the US EPA did not even exist prior to 1970. And some of the first laws in our country that really started to regulate new chemicals coming out onto the market, and requiring all kinds of studies and toxicity testing to be done. Those laws really didn't even start to come out until 1976 in the late 70s. Well, if you think about it, there were tens of thousands of chemicals that had already been put out into commerce and were being manufactured, particularly beginning right after World War II. And this family of chemicals, PFOS, was a perfect example of that. They were developed by the 3M company right after World War II and started being pumped out into the environment, sold to people like DuPont, who used it to make Teflon, in the early 1950s. So by the time these laws started rolling out in the 70s, they really were focusing more on the new chemicals made after that point in time. And there was really nothing requiring anybody to go back and re-examine the chemicals that were already out there. And the way our laws worked at that point is it essentially said for those existing chemicals like PFOA, it was up to the companies who were making them or using them to alert the EPA if there was information suggesting that they might pose the term was substantial risk to human health or the public. And unfortunately, as we see in this case, the companies who had all the information were the ones also making the decision that they didn't think it was a risk and they weren't going to report it to the EPA.
Right,
and as we see later,
billion, right?
Yeah, and as we see later, the EPA disagreed with that and actually sued DuPont and said, no, you should have reported this to us decades earlier. And we could have begun regulating these chemicals a long time ago. But what happened is in the meantime, it was, these chemicals were then allowed to continue to be pumped out into the environment for decades and decades and get into our water, our soil, and our blood. So, that was a system that really, frankly, a lot of people started to realize wasn't working very well. There have been attempts made to try to fix that. Some of the law was beefed up a bit in 2016, but it really is still something that folks are saying, there's got to be a better way to address chemicals going out into our environment.
Absolutely, that system was very, very mind-boggling to me when it was presented in the movie for me. One thing that really struck me about the story was just how supportive your peers and superiors were when it came to taking on this case. In particular, your managing partner, Tom Turp. In the movie, he's played by Shawshank Redemption's Tim Robbins. I just wanted to shout that out because I love the Shawshank Redemption. Who doesn't? He never really took the stance that most superiors do in films where, their subordinates, it's kind of like drop this case immediately and work on the interests of the firm. Did you feel empowered as an employee of Taft to be taking on this case and supported by someone like Tom?
Yeah, I think a lot of stars had to align, for this case to work out the way it did. And one of those was the fact that I was at the Taft law firm at the time, and that Tom Turp happened to be the head of our environmental group at the time when Mr. Tennant walked in our door. And he was able to also see these videos. And so he saw firsthand what we were seeing. He was seeing the documents as they came in. And we were fortunate that throughout this litigation, he not only remained, head of the environmental group, he became the managing partner of the whole firm. Particularly during those years where we were waiting for a lot of this science to finally be confirmed. And so I was glad to see the folks participant the way they were able to put this together to show folks not only how difficult this was, for a firm to make a decision to do something like this, but that there were folks that really were there to support it and stand by it, even when it started getting rough. And I'm not sure how many law firms would have done that. To be able to stick by litigation like this for decades, and to be able to stand by those clients and make sure that we got to the end of it. I'm not sure how many other firms would have been able to do that, or it just was incredibly fortunate to be at the firm I was at.
Absolutely, you 100% hit the nail on the head. All of the stars needed to align for this to happen, for this to be brought to light. In February 2017, DuPont settled over 3,535 PFOA lawsuits for over $671 million, but they denied any wrongdoing. Although the settlement is good news for the plaintiffs in these cases, do you feel that it's only a small victory, considering that DuPont aren't necessarily taking responsibility? I mean, for you personally, is that must be a part of it, surely?
Well, I think it's always difficult for clients, to understand that in our legal system, the way our legal system works is if you win a case, you're entitled to money damages. That's what the other side has to do, is they have to pay damages, or in settlements, that's what they do. There's nothing, typically you can do to force them to ever admit liability or take responsibility. And that's very frustrating for a lot of folks, that aren't familiar with the legal process. And even in this case, you mentioned, we were able to fortunately be able to secure this settlement for the 3,500 or so folks that had direct injuries from being exposed to this chemical in their drinking water. But that's the small portion here. We're talking about a chemical that's in drinking water all over the planet and in people all over the planet. And unfortunately, you've got companies that are still denying responsibility to any of those folks. And it's incredibly frustrating, particularly as the science has become so clear on the risks that these chemicals pose. We still have parties getting up and saying to the public or to the U.S. Congress, that there's no science showing any risk from these chemicals, even though, as you see in the film, we had one of the biggest human health studies ever done with any chemical, with this one, PFOA, that was able to confirm through independent scientists studying 70,000 people, taking 7 years, a dozen different epidemiology studies looking at all of the data, published, unpublished, able to confirm links with serious disease, including cancer. Yet you still have people out there saying, this never happened. The science isn't there. And that's one of the reasons, again, I was so happy to see the folks at Participant and Mark Ruffalo in particular, who was able to get this film out so that people can see what we really do know, what really did happen, what science is really there. And that's what I wanted to make sure was documented in the book as well, that we do know. The science is there on this. And we do have information, particularly about PFOA, and we need to be taking action on it. You can't just keep saying, trying to manufacture the doubt and trying to perpetuate this myth that we don't know enough, and we need to just not take any action and keep studying and keep and let this contamination continue. It's got to stop.
Absolutely. And you're certainly raising awareness pretty successfully because, when Dark Waters released in November last year, DuPont's stock price dropped by 7.15 points. Like, the word is getting out there. It is fantastic to see people recognizing just how big of an issue this is and that DuPont is not bulletproof. There's this veil of, they're a big corporation, they know what they're talking about, but that's quite clearly not the case. Throwing out a bit of a movie question for you here. The screenplay for Dark Waters was written by Mario Correa and Matthew Carnahan. What's it like to see other writers interpreting your story and shaping it for a visual medium? How much... I know the movie was technically credited as being based on the New York Times article, but how much input did you actually have in making the film? Did you get a say on some of the more exaggerated or dramatized elements of it? Like, how did the studio first get in touch with you?
It was after the New York Times article came out by Nathaniel Rich that I was first contacted. Mark Ruffalo actually reached out and was just really surprised by the story and the fact that he had never heard of this. And he was very active on water issues and environmental issues and was just floored that how could something like this be happening and have happened for so long, and particularly in recent times. And he had never heard of it. And, how could we bring this out to the public? And, that he and the folks at Participant were just a tremendous group that was able to see, the importance of this, and not only the importance of it, but wanted to make sure it was done the right way and was really focused on what actually happened, the real people, the real stories here. And I was fortunate enough to be able to consult with them. And, a lot of this was filmed in our offices in Cincinnati. So I was able to be there. I was able to help them. For those of you that might be listening that are lawyers, I was able to at least help out, like, for example, in the scene of the deposition of the CEO, how that happens, how that works, where people sit, how the documents are delivered, and that kind of thing. So I was able to have, some really significant, input, and there was a fantastic group. I can't speak highly enough about Mario and Mark. Matthew. they did a tremendous job taking a very complicated story that spans decades and involves a lot of science and a lot of complicated legal and legalese and legal maneuvers, and really were able to put it together in a way that in 2 hours really shows you the essence of the story and what happened and what its real impact was on real people. They did a fantastic job.
Absolutely. They absolutely did. That's such a challenge for film writers. And by the way, my co-workers who work with me threatened to listen to this episode of the podcast in particular, so they're listening very intently, I'm sure. This year in particular saw a couple of movies, including Dark Waters, that have just been so inspirational for young lawyers like myself. Earlier this year, we got a movie about Bryan Stevenson, who was the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative. The movie was called Just Mercy. And I personally have always been captivated by films that show lawyers doing extraordinary things. Now, I understand that not every case is going to be like yours. But to close out this interview, what advice would you give to young lawyers out there who are navigating their way through the profession?
I think the law degree gives you an incredible opportunity, and you never know, where that opportunity is going to lead you. You could join what you think is a corporate defense law firm and end up with a very unusual career path. That is an incredible opportunity to shape a career specific to your own personality, and in a way that you can really best serve your clients. I hope people realize that they shouldn't feel like there are certain pigeonholes in the legal profession, and if you're working within one particular area, that you're defined by whatever people might have done in that area in the past. You have the ability to change that and to really create new things and new pathways with that legal degree.
That's fantastic, Robert. Thank you. This is an issue that, for lack of a better phrase, consumed your life, the PFOA issue, PFOS. What's next for you in the battle against these forever chemicals?
Well, we are still actively litigating these issues. As we learned that this was not just a PFOA problem, that it was the whole family of chemicals that are now all over the planet. We've got litigation that's really popped up all over the United States and, frankly, all over the world. And we're trying to help the different parties who've been impacted and injured by this contamination all over, and really trying to continue to spread understanding and awareness of the scope and severity of this problem, and try to help fashion ways to fix it and to get whatever science is needed, to really confirm what the true risks and the true scope of the problem are. One of the most recent cases I've been involved in, we filed in federal court in Ohio back in 2018, is actually seeking to bring a new nationwide class action on behalf of everyone who has these chemicals in their blood, to try to seek not money, but studies and new testing and science to be done to confirm exactly what this group of chemicals are doing to us and will do to us in the future. We now know we have a mix of these things in our body, and we shouldn't be hearing from the companies that are making them and pumping them out into our environment, knowing they'll get into us. Well, there just isn't enough science or study to prove that they're causing you any harm. Well, if that's the case, they ought to be funding the studies that are necessary to tell us exactly what they will do. The taxpayers shouldn't have to be doing that. So that's one thing I'm working on right now.
That's fantastic, Robert. That federal class action, that must, I'm sure you're intending that to get so many members. It's such a big class size, I'd imagine. I just wanted to personally thank you for everything you've done. Not only for those that were directly and indirectly affected by DuPont's actions, but for inspiring myself and for contributing to my professional drive, direction, and motivation going into the future. It's been very surreal speaking to you over the phone, so I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
Thank you, Rob. Where can we find your book? Where can we find? I mean, I know we can find Dark Waters pretty much anywhere on iTunes, Amazon, but where can we find more about your book?
Yeah, the book is called Exposure, published by Atria Books and Simon & Schuster. You can either find it through the Simon & Schuster website, or it's available online through most of the major bookseller and online retailers as well. It's hard copy and paperback. Just came out in paperback last week.
Brilliant. And I have the audiobook version, and the first chapter is read by Mark Ruffalo, which is fantastic. So, yeah. But thank you so much for joining us here, Robert. This has, again, been such a fantastic opportunity, and we are absolutely honored to host you.
Thank you so much. It was great talking with you.